Good morning. No, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a little bit cooler today, so I'm in sort of winter garb. But anyway, here I am. I'm up to, where did I get that up here? Yes, number 6, and I'll peer over the top, like "Foo was here." Do you remember those "Foo was here" things that used to be all over the place just after the war? I don't know. I can't really tell you who Foo was and why Foo was here, but anyway, he apparently was here. But I'm here, and I'm up to number 6. Now, just as I'm feeling a little bit of cold today, I have to remind you, that we old fellows, it gets into our bones and that sort of thing, and we tend to be a bit sort of squeamish when it comes to cold. Sometimes our minds wander, For instance, yesterday when I was talking about the 1864 flood, on 2 occasions I referred to it as the 1894 flood. Well, you must have thought it was a bit of a turn-up for the books. You hadn't heard of that one, but anyway, there we are. But anyway, look, on we go. Now, what I was going to try to do today is deal with one of those things that, so far, when I've explained things, I've talked about actual records, and most of the things I've talked about so far, you can take them exactly and precisely from the records. So it's not, my aged mind wandering or anything like that. I'm usually, apart from when I make a mistake with. And in fact, I think sometimes I refer to a date of, say, 18-something as 19-something, or 19-something as 18-something. But you must forgive me. That's how we old fellows go. And I warn you, it all lies ahead of you. But what I'm going to deal with today is a guess. Some of the things that happened out there, as would have been true everywhere, were sort of a bit under the counter. Or if they weren't under the counter, then there's nothing in the records about them, and so you get a hint here, a hint here, a hint, and then you see some result. And so you're put in a position where you have to sort of do a little bit of speculation about how this result occurred, maybe as a result of this hint and this hint and this hint. So what I'm going to talk about now is something that is not in the records. The hints about it are in the records, but you cannot see what actually happened. And this is exactly how the Janetzkys got the title to that pub. Now, the Janetzkys were not rich. They went out to Charleville in it must have been April of 1866. Now, there'd been a great drought in the Roma area, and there was absolutely no money. And Louis Janetzky had married Mary, I think she was called Foley at that point, in December of 1865, and clearly they were looking for a job. And they were offered a job out in Charleville managing the pub, and off they went, because jobs were as scarce as hen's teeth. But they were clearly not rich and could not have been rich, and so out they went. And so they became the proprietors, or we'll say the licensees of and they're quite valid licensees, because you can read their application for the license in the newspapers of the period. And they put in an application every year, and the years, so they right through until 1869. And so they became the managers of what was called the Cooper's Hotel. Now let's just run through Cooper's Hotel. Cooper's Hotel had been run by Robert Cooper, or he was there for about 6 months, but no more than 8 months, I would have thought. And then that same building, that same pub building, had been the building occupied for about 6 months by what's his name, Brownlow. And if you read, let's see if I've got it here. I don't know whether I marked it off or not. No, it's just here somewhere. But you'll have to take my word for it, if you're prepared to do that. Now, we know that the Brownlow pub was probably also the original pub that was built sometime in 1864. We know that because early in February, I think about the 8th of February, something like that, this fellow who called himself Carl Churton wrote a letter to the Brisbane Courier in which he makes reference to the caravanserai, but he's writing about the period, or describing the period, when Tully came out there to visit. And so he says there was a pub there at the time that Tully came out to visit in about 1864. Well, we also know that if there was a pub there in 1864, in August or September, that it could only have been built after the Great Flood of March and April of 1864, because the Great Flood would have washed everything else away. But at least you would have been able to tell where the flood had been and where it had been worse and not quite as bad. And so they erected a pub there, but who ran it? And I don't even think it had a name, probably just called the Warrego Pub or something like that, but it had no formal name and it had no formal licence. But nevertheless, from 1865 on, possibly with the gazetting of the Reserve, a licence had to be applied for, and so Brownlow applied for the licence. And so, as far as I can tell, Brownlow applied for the licence to run the hotel in the building that was built after the flood of 1864. He kept it for only 6 months, and then after that Robert Cooper had it for no more than 8 months at the most, and then the Janetzkys took it over, but they took it over as manager. Now, there was a very interesting court case in 1869. What month was this? July of 1869, I see. And it involved a fellow called Mazarath. Now, Mazarath is largely unknown to Charleville history. I'd never heard about him, and I came upon him only when I was combing through the details of that survey plan, Chester's survey plan C1401. And there I noticed, what does it actually say? It says, well, no, it doesn't actually say anything other than it uses the term improvements. And these were what that meant was that when that land auction in Charleville took place on 30th September 1867, anyone who had effected an improvement on the land had an automatic right to purchase the block upon which it was placed as a result of the survey that Chester had done. And if you go through that particular list of improvements, you find 4 people mentioned there. And those structures, such as they were the same structures that were mentioned in that description by the Traveller of 1868. One of them, of course, was the pub, and that was attributed to none other than E. Mazarath. Now, who was this fellow, I thought? I've never heard of him anywhere. Zeeman, yes. Zeeman, they were improvers. They had the shop. What did I say? Yes, the store. That was allotment 1 of section 1. That's where opposite the post office, where the Queensland National Bank used to be. The hotel, of course, the Mazarath Hotel, Cooper's Hotel, was on allotment 6. The Charleville Hotel, I think, was, well, I thought, and the paper seems to suggest that it was constructed or begun in 1867, but it may have been a little earlier than that. But anyway, that was on allotment 1 of section 2. That's where the Charleville still stands. And then there was a humpy. It was called here a house by Captain Lambert. The printing is so small I can't quite tell. It's certainly he was tied up with the police, of course, but why don't I have a look? Oh, okay. He's described as Inspector of Police. So they were the 4 buildings of 1868, and they were the 4 buildings that were around when that auction took place in September of 1867. And it was around those structures that Chester sort of arranged the blocks in section 1 of the town survey plan. So anyway, there we are. But here's this fellow, Mazarath, and here are this pub, the one building, 3 bedrooms, and as I see 2 sitting rooms. I did think it was 3, but anyway, first of all, sort of there in 1864, probably after the flood, we don't know who had that. But it was still there, and you see, Churton refers to it early in February of 1865. But we also know that Brownlow applied for the licence later in February 1865. So you had two quite independent people, two independent witnesses, of course, witnessing the fact that there was one pub there, the one building, and that building probably the same building of 4 bedrooms and 2 sitting rooms. And so then it went on. And then ultimately, by the time you get to 1867, it's owned by a fellow called Mazareth. But if you read the Charleville histories, they describe a rather different situation. They say that the pub was built by Janetzky for Robert Cooper. Well, we know that the pub was long since there before Robert Cooper, so Louis Janetzky didn't do anything. He may have added another sitting room after a year or two or something like that. But it's very curious, you know. It says that Louis Janetzky bought the pub that he had built for Robert Cooper. Well, Robert Cooper must have been a bit of a, you know, what would one say, scatterbrain sort of fellow. If he employed someone to build a pub for him, and then he only stayed about 6 months and then departed, never to be heard of again, I might add. Well, apart from this, in this case. But I suspect that, of course, none of that was true. This fellow Mazareth was a rogue of the first order from Roma, and he was described in 1866 by Mr. Hunter, the storekeeper from Mangalore, as, well, he calls him Mr. Smith. A mysterious Mr. Smith was somehow or another involved with the Cooper's Hotel. And, oh God, I tell you what, the things I got up to. Anyway, this Mr. Smith, so-called partner with Robert Cooper in the Cooper's Hotel, a man with an interest in pub, he was interested in establishing another pub and interested in establishing another town at Mangalore, because this was all part of the Mangalore push, you see. And he had an interest anyway in establishing a pub at Mangalore because he thought, yes, there'd be money in it. But of course Mr. Hunter didn't think much of it, because he said, if we establish another pub at Mangalore, it'll become, you know, a den of thieves, of horse thieves who infested the area, especially as the pub is located at the junction of 3 runs. So there we are. But anyway, so we have this fellow Mazareth. Well, Mazareth was quite a character. Now, I think that the chances are, now I can't say, because there's no evidence, other than you know, you just have to take the hints and guess at it. I think the person who really had that pub, or owned that pub all along, was none other than Mazareth of Roma. And certainly he was regarded as the owner of the improvement at the time that the auction took place in 1867. That pub, and so Section 1, Allotment 6, should have gone to Mazareth at, well, just under 0.8 of an acre. What would it have cost him? £6.10. But it didn't go to him. Well, now what happened? Well, what do we know about Mazareth? We know that Mazareth was a rogue. And we also know that Mazareth was something of a bush lawyer. For instance, in this case that I mentioned of 1869, the Queensland Times says that, you know, His Honour appears on the bench. I can't see who His Honour was. Might have been Mr. Lutwich, I think, but I'm not quite sure. But anyway, no matter. This is what His Honour said. His Honour remarked at the beginning of the proceedings, His Honour remarked to commence with that he had now sat 15 times at the District Court in Roma, and at each sitting Mr. Mazareth had been present in some shape or another, as plaintiff or defendant, or both, and in some cases more than once at each sitting. So he liked the courts, and he was a bush lawyer. He was no lawyer, but he was a bush lawyer, and I think he sought to intimidate people with the law, and apparently people were fairly easily intimidated with it. But anyway, on the this case in 1869, you know, there was sort of, you know, last drinks for him, I think. He brought a case against Louis Janetzky, And he said that he was bringing the case against Louis Janetzky on behalf of a Miss Farren. He said that he had some rights. This is Mazareth said he had some rights, 1/3 rights to the profits of Cooper's Hotel. But he had sold those rights on to Miss Farren, who was not present in the case, but he was a gentleman and he was bringing a case on her behalf, and she was in Brisbane. Well, nothing much came of it because the judge saw this man was a total rogue. Well, he said, where's the agreement? Ah, said Mazareth, it's with Miss Farren in Brisbane. Well, said the judge, we'll defer the case until October, when you'll come back and you'll present the agreement, and then we'll hear a case. But on condition that you pay all of the expenses that are incurred in making this second appearance by the person you've accused. That's Louis Janetzky. Well, of course, there was probably never any agreement, and probably there was, well, certainly with him sold to Miss Farren, and certainly when his bluff was called, Mazareth folded. Okay then. So what was this agreement supposed to have been? The agreement was that when Janetzky went into the pub, now remember they're pretty penniless and they've just been married and there's no work and there's a drought and all that sort of thing, he apparently entered into, according to Mazareth, an agreement with 3 people, or there were 3 people involved. And this agreement said that, look, this pub will produce profits and let's share the profits. He said, Cooper is the owner of the pub and therefore he's entitled to 1/3 of the profits. Janetzky is the manager of the pub, so he will be entitled to 1/3 of the profits, and I am supplying what he called the necessaries for the pub, and I'm entitled to 1/3 of the profits, which was not a bad deal really, because Mazareth already had a pub in Roma and he was going to supply at a price determined by him the necessaries that were going to be used by Janetzky. So he took his profit and then was taking a second one. But I don't think that Cooper owned the place at all. I think Cooper was just a frontman for... He was also from Roma, my dad. He was just a frontman for Mazareth, and so really the agreement that Louis Janetzky entered into, and he must have seemed a fool to do it, Cooper's 1/3 was supposed to go to Mazareth. Mazareth's 1/3 went to him at great profit, and poor old Louis Janetzky was left with 1/3 of the profit on goods that had already been profited for, or by whatever it may have been, by Mazareth himself. Well, as I say, nothing much came of that case because that was the last drinks at the pub as far as Mazareth was concerned. Well, let's go back. But it all involves Mazareth, of course. So you've got Louis and Mary Janetzky running the pub, and they're running the pub, and their pay, if you like, was the share, 1/3 share of the profits. And Mazareth, being the sharp fellow that he was, thought they must have been, country bumpkins. They must have been fools. They must have been fools and desperate to take this on. And he regarded them, I think, as, absolute dolts, and so easily duped and so on. But nevertheless, they soldiered on. So they soldiered on until, they soldiered on there until 1869. But exciting events took place. Now remember, there's not much money, and a lot of fires in hotels in that part of the world generally occurred at times of, difficult economic circumstances, but usually the pubs were well insured. Anyway, as it happened, this man with an interest in pubs, who may or may not have built that Mangalore pub, I really do not know, but I think he was Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith indeed. I mean, you can read all the papers until the cows come over that period, and the only reference to a Mr. Smith was this phantom creature who was supposed to be a partner of Cooper. But anyway, enough of that. Mazareth had a hotel in Roma. In fact, when I had a look at Mary McManus's work the other day, Mary McManus mentions Mazareth's hotel in Roma, which she said burnt down. She made no other comment about it, but the newspapers at the time said plenty. Now let me see, here we are. So the first hint of excitement comes in, where is this? November. November of 1866. The report says, a private telegram has been received in Brisbane, dated Condamine, November the 12th, to the effect that Mazareth's Hotel at Roma had been burnt to the ground, and that the mailbags were all destroyed. This is the same building in which a fire occurred on the 29th of the previous month. So there'd been a fire in that hotel twice, one in October, one in November. First one was obviously an attempt, and the second one was successful. The building burnt down. Okay then. Well, if you have a pub that has burnt down, well, no doubt, you don't have a pub burns down as a general rule unless you've got up-to-date and well-paid and very handsome insurance. Anyway, it was well insured. He had a number of people working for him there who were sort of, thrown upon the chances of life. One of them was none other than Miss Farren. And if I can find it here, let me see. No, it's not there. Miss Farren may be mentioned over here. Just one minute. Oh, yes, here we are. Now, what's his name? Mazareth worked on a low overhead basis. You see, he employed two people. One fellow he employed for no wages, because this fellow taught him English, he said. But Miss Farren was an interesting one. In the court evidence given, I think, in the 1869 case, when he was asked, well, on what basis did you employ Miss Farren? This is what Mazareth said. He said, she was my housekeeper. I am not married. She entered my service more than 2 years ago. I did not pay her any wages. She was engaged at £2.10 per week and to be responsible for all of the property placed in her charge. But of course, £2.10 a week, but she didn't get any of it. And she lent me £100 because I wanted it in the year of 1865. Well, okay then. She was a kindly woman. But anyway, there's another reference to her here which I thought was quite interesting. Wait until I find it. No. Wait until I move on over here. Because it says that Miss Farren, who, remember, lent him £100, had actually received no wages for quite a considerable time. Now, how... oh dear. How Miss Farren managed to survive and lend money at £100 after not being paid for so long may well be explained by this. Now, at the time of the fire, Mazareth, of course, was not in town. Mazareth may have been like someone I know of from Charleville, who at the time his place burned down, was not present. In fact, at the time he was on his way to Brisbane and was maybe at Roma or Morven or Mitchell or something like that. He was certainly not there. Okay, well, this is what is said about, that may explain, and this is one of the little guesses we have to make, about how Miss Farren managed to get by. Conspicuous among those who picked out everything that belonged to Mr. Mazareth, but not to themselves, is, I might say, is, a lady of doubtful profession. Not was a lady of doubtful profession, is a lady of doubtful profession, who has occupied a position in the Maranoa Hotel which puzzles the insurance agents and is likely to bamboozle the Crown Prosecutor at the next Circuit Court. She was sometimes in the bar and sometimes in the bedrooms, and so on and on and go. Anyway, that was Miss Farren. Okay, and that's what's his name, Mazareth. Well, Mazareth Mazareth's hotel burnt down. But the insurance companies didn't always cooperate. One of the insurance companies bailed up and said, "We will not pay out because this is very suspicious." And no right to be suspicious. But if you can find, I think, 2 people in town who are prepared to swear that they do not believe that the fire was a case of arson, then maybe we will pay up. But it appeared that nobody was prepared to say, "We don't believe it was arson," so poor old Mazareth was in a bit of a fix. Well, he had a problem. He was declared insolvent. Well, of course, if someone is declared insolvent, it means that they owe a hell of a lot more money than they've got access to. And Mazareth owed a lot of money to a lot of people, and they wanted the money back. Well, was there skullduggery going on? Everybody was looking for Mazareth's assets. Okay, then. In fact, they were stealing from one another. There's an instance here. There was a sort of fracas along the road to Roma. You see, what had happened was this. This is in one case. This is goods worth, let me see. Oh, I can't quite tell that one. Ah, yes. I mean, everyone was after Mazareth's assets, and insofar as there was an asset on the horizon, people were stealing from one another in order to get possession of things. So what happened was this, in this particular case, Mazareth had ordered goods to the value of £600 from Wineholt and Company of Ipswich, which he had paid for by a promissory note. Well, the fire had taken place. Mazareth was insolvent, and goods worth £600 were on the way to Roma addressed to him. Okay, paid for by a promissory note given to Wineholt's. Well, if the goods had continued on to Roma, Mazareth would have got the goods worth £600. Well, the Wineholt's weren't having any of this, so the Wineholt's arranged to hold up the wagon. And they said to the wagoner, or if I suppose what you call him, a wagoner maybe, I'm not quite sure, "Show me your waybills." So the wagoner showed him the waybills, and the Wineholt's rubbed out the name of Mazareth. I think he might have been called a consignee or something like that. Rubbed out his name and put their own name in, so that when the goods arrived in Roma, they were delivered to the Wineholt's, and they got the goods back, and they didn't go to Mazareth. But anyway, that was one ruse. Insurance companies and banks did all sorts of things, like they got in for their chop first, and a lot of the creditors were left high and dry. So everybody was after Mazareth's assets, because they're only being offered, you see, 9p in the pound, I think, at one stage, and maybe that's all they got. And then there was this final settlement in about 1871 or 72, in which it was a penny in the pound. So, you know, it wasn't good to be owed money by him. But the land auction of September the 30th, 1867, was right in the middle of the insolvency period. Now, up until the land auction, Mazareth had no title. He had the pub. It was sort of, you know, like de facto ownership of the pub, but he didn't have any legal title to the allotment 6 upon which the pub. Now, if he had actually got that, as he was entitled to get it at the auction, that would have been a very handsome asset, because it was valued, in itself it was valued at £900 and the well 120, making it the most valuable property in town. It would have been a very handsome asset, and you may have been sure that the legal people seeking his assets and dealing with the insolvency would have grabbed it very quickly. Well, Mazareth, I mean, what was he to do? If he actually took possession and had got the right to the title of allotment 6 of section number 1, he'd have lost the whole thing totally. It would have gone off to the court, the insolvency court. Well, he didn't want that. So he thought, well, what can I do? Well, this sale took place in September of 1867. And what I think happened was this. I have no evidence other than just my guesses. But I do know about the insolvency problem. And I do know about the value of the pub. He could not accept the title to the pub, even though he had to allotment 6, even though he had a right to it. And you'll also notice, if you look, that Louis Janetzky got allotment 7 and Mary Janetzky got allotment 5. Now, in other words, and if you look at the map, allotment 7 and allotment 5 was settled and the title dated several months earlier than the title for allotment 6. So there was some to-do going on about allotment 6. But what I think has happened was this. Mazareth decided that those fools, Janetzky, if he could involve it, he could lend them money. And he reckoned he could probably do better out of lending them money and in getting involved in some repayment plan than he would have got out of just surrendering totally the title to allotment 6 if he actually got the true legal title to it. And I think he inveigled the Janetzkys into signing this agreement, and lo and behold, Janetzkys ended up with the title, probably with the most terrible debt, and they were probably even more broke than they had begun. If you look at the title details for allotment 6, you'll see that it was settled a couple of months after allotments 5 and 7. For instance, allotments 5 and 7, the Janetzky name is spelled Janetzkie, but allotment 6 of some months later was Janetzky. So I think that what happened was that he did one of these under-counter deals, lent them money. They were going to be kept broke for a few more years, and he at least was going to get something out of that block that he would not have got had it gone to the insolvency court. Well, the poor old Janetzkys, they soldiered on, and well, he was taking the money from them in a big way. But he misjudged Mary Janetzky. And finally, Mary, of course, probably took a bit of legal advice, I think, because she was, the Janetzkys, you know, they didn't mind going to court from time to time. And Mary began this process probably in 1869, I think. Anyway, Mary, either from her own wit or from legal advice, declared or knew that whatever they had done, all this under-counter business, whatever they had done, had no real legal standing at all. It was just one of the bush lawyers under-the-counter deals. And she must have known that it had no legal standing at all. And so the Janetzkys declared, we are paying him not one more cent because the debt is an imaginary one. We've got the title, we're paying him nothing. He was high and dry, and he could do nothing about it. And so by 1869, the Janetzkys said, look, we've had enough of pub keeping. We've got the title to the pub. So they gave the title of the pub over to the Bradleys of Mangalore. And so the Bradleys of Mangalore ran it for some years. They gave them title. They got, yes, it was a rental of the building on 4-year leases or something like that, I think. And anyway, when Mary came back in the 1870s, she resumed the ownership of the operation of the pub. But in 1869, they thought, look, we've got the title, we'll rent it out to the Bradleys and be done with it. And so back they went to Hamburg Creek, where they apparently lived for a couple of years. I don't know how they got them, but they had a pub there at Hamburg Creek, and maybe they ran that, or maybe they kept horses or something. But anyway, in 1871, I think it was, Christmas Eve, I think, 1871, they found gold at Charleville Towers. Well, here was the opportunity the Janetzkys wanted. They gathered together horses and the kids and all the rest of it, and away they went at wagon pace up to Charleville Towers. where I think they probably involved in trade or something like that. But unfortunately, Louis got typhoid fever, and well, he died. But Mary, of course, on the day before he died, the man was in extremis with the typhoid. He managed to have drawn up for him and to sign, I've seen the signature, a very detailed will, not leaving anything to Mary. She already owned allotment 5 in her own right. Everything was left to the 2 infant daughters. The elder of whom, Mary, died when she was about 7. They were all Hallows. And so it all ultimately ended with Louisa, who became Louisa Adrian. And so there we are. So the Janetzkys didn't get the pub by buying it for Robert Cooper. It was owned by Mazareth, an under-the-counter shady crook of the first order. And I think that because of the insolvency complications, he found it better to somehow or another, by wheeling and dealing, to get the title into the hands of the Janetzkys and also get into the hands of very huge debt. And that's why his name doesn't appear as the owner of allotment 6, because legally it was not to his advantage to have it in his name. So there we are. So the sweet story, the lovely story, is that Louis built the hotel, and later on they bought it for him, and it all went on in sweetness and light. Well, the Janetzkys in their histories make no mention of that. Father Flynn makes no mention of that. In fact, it seems that Mazareth was a sort of persona non grata as far as the history of the Janetzkys were concerned, but he was involved in it well and truly, and he was the dark force behind everything that went on. But he was undone by Mary's wit. And I think that's a better story anyway than the lovely hagiographic story of building the pub and buying it from Cooper. Cooper was just another one of the Roma dupes that Mazareth had sent forth. So there you are. Anyway, that's enough for today.